Today on Know the Truth from Philip DeCourcy.
Live for kingdom priorities, because death is coming. I like the undertaker who finished his letter to everybody he wrote to, eventually yours. That's the way it is. Don't lay up treasure on the earth. Lay up treasure in heaven. Live for eternal things.
When it comes to money, there's all kinds of wishful thinking about what it can accomplish. Many believe that wealth can provide lasting satisfaction, security, and serenity. But while it's nice to think we could have all of this and more if only we had enough money, that's only creating a recipe for disappointment. Today on Know the Truth, Philip DeCourcy looks to Ecclesiastes to dispel common myths about money. It's the third part of a message titled Your Money or Your Life, and you can listen online at ktt.org. Here now is Pastor Philip.
Catherine Mansfield, a writer, once said, "I must say I hate money, but it's the lack of it I hate most." Catherine Mansfield is not alone in her desire to have more money. After all, the credo of the Western world is, the more money you have, the more happiness you'll know, the more security you'll obtain, and the more life you'll enjoy. We're sold this idea that money is the universal passport to a better life. But here in Ecclesiastes chapter 5 and chapter 6, King Solomon issues a caution. He waves a red flag. He shoots up a flare. Here's a man worth listening to when it comes to money, because what he knows about money, he learned the hard way by having it. And Solomon would caution us in the belief that money is the universal passport to a better life. He'll actually argue in chapter 5 that more times than not, it's simply a chasing of the wind. And so this man who was rich beyond compare in his day, and still would give any billionaire in our culture a run for his money in our day, Solomon explodes myths and explores truths. And if you were with us for the last couple of weeks, we worked our way some of the myths, and we identified 3. Wealth doesn't bring satisfaction. Solomon teaches us that in chapter 5 and verses 8 through 10, and then he spills that thought again in chapter 6 and verse 7. Look at verse 10. He who loves silver will not be satisfied with silver, nor he who loves abundance with increase. This also is vanity. Solomon is here to tell us that satisfaction is the proverbial carrot on a stick. It's always just going to be out of reach. According to Solomon, when it comes to this world's goods, satisfaction is sold separately. He then explodes a second myth in verse 11. When goods increase, they increase who eat them. Wealth not only fails to bring satisfaction, it fails to bring sufficiency. Solomon will make an argument that wealth becomes a magnet for scammers and for spongers. Everybody wants to make friends with the wealthy man, and for wrong reasons. In fact, if you go over to chapter 6 and verses 3 through 6, Solomon sets before us a hypothetical man who, fathers hundreds of children, who is wealthy beyond imagination, and who lives for 1,000 years and more. But the interesting thing is his wealth breeds covetousness, competition, and conflict within his home to such a degree that when he's laid to rest, no one laments his passing. In fact, if you look at verse 3, if a man begets 100 children and lives many years so that the days of his years are many, but his soul is not satisfied with goodness, or indeed he has no burial, I say that a stillborn child is better than he. It's not that this man didn't have a burial. That's Hebraic language. If you go over to Jeremiah 22 and verses 18 and 19, that's a Hebraic language for no one laments his passing. Basically, there are those who belong to the memorial park who lay this man to rest, but virtually nobody else is there. No sons, no daughters are there, because there's been so much infighting in the home over his money that it has torn this family apart. What was a blessing has really become a curse. There's the old saying, where there's a will, there's a crowd, and that's true here in Ecclesiastes chapter 6, verses 3 through 6. Wealth doesn't bring satisfaction. Wealth doesn't bring sufficiency. Wealth doesn't bring serenity. That's where we left off, verse 12. The sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eats little or much, but the abundance of the rich will not permit him to sleep. The more money a man has, the more responsibility he gathers, and the more worries come with the increase of responsibilities that have increased his material wealth. Basically, it goes like this. Wealth produces anxiety. Anxiety produces insomnia. And that's actually true. But there's a fourth myth that Solomon wants to dynamite. Wealth brings security. That's not true, he says. And this takes us into verses 13 and following. Solomon wants to remind us, and those to whom he is addressing, he wants to remind us and them that riches are uncertain. That's a phrase that Paul uses, doesn't he, in 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 17. Money can be here today and gone tomorrow. It's a sad and sickening reality that in life, misfortune can quickly strike a man and rob him of his fortune. Here today, gone tomorrow. That's what's true about material things. Life has a way, hasn't it? If we had time, I'm sure somebody could stand up and tell us a story that proves my point here. Life has a way of pulling the rug out from under our feet. Just when you get the keys to your new house, just when you sit down behind the desk in your new office, just when you've retired with a reasonably sized nest egg, life has a way of throwing us a curveball, of pulling the carpet from out under our feet and reminding us that life is precarious and money is perilous and passing and fleeting in its nature. And Solomon tells us the story in verse 13 of a man who kept his riches to his own hurt. And then his riches, verse 14, perished through misfortune. And when he begets a son, there's nothing in his hand for his son. And he came from his mother's womb naked, and to the grave he goes naked. Solomon paints a bleak picture of a man who had quite a bit of money. He kind of hoarded it, kept it close to himself. He might have been frugal, he might have been a miser. The text doesn't tell us. But there comes a point when everything goes south. Maybe a bad investment, fraud, war, recession. But he gets to see how unpredictable life is and how uncertain riches are. In fact, if you go over to Proverbs 23 and verse 5, you'll read that riches have a tendency to sprout wings and fly away. Listen to what Proverbs says. Will you set your eyes on that which is not? For riches certainly make themselves wings. They fly away like an eagle toward heaven. This man found that to be true. And you and I need to nail that reality down. Wealth does not bring security. Let me make a couple of applications. This man's loss, or the depiction of this man's loss, reminds us all of the uncertainty of riches, doesn't it? Think about this. Money cannot be protected. You can't protect money against, a downturn in the economy, a fall in the stock market, war, recession, fraud, robbery. You cannot protect money, and that means that money cannot protect you. It can't provide you security. In fact, Jesus alludes to that, doesn't he, in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 6, verse 19 through 21. He tells us, don't lay up treasures on the earth where moth and rust corrupt and thieves break in and steal. It was going on back then. It's going on today. You can't protect your assets, and your assets can't be the ground of your sense of security. Money sprouts wings and flies away. You may count your money, but you cannot count on your money. J.C. Ryle's one of my favorite writers. He belongs to a former generation, Bishop of Liverpool in England. If you read something of his life story, his family lost their inheritance. His dad's business went belly up and the family declared bankruptcy in 1841. And that was something that marked the thinking of J.C. Ryle. In fact, if you read anything of his life, biographies will tell you that 32 years on from that incident, it still hurts him to talk about it. It still wounds him to think about it. Now, having gone through that, listen to these words by J.C. Ryle. Money is, in truth, one of the most unsatisfying of possessions. It takes away some cares, no doubt, but it brings with it quite as many cares as it takes away. There is the trouble of getting it. There is the anxiety of keeping it. There are the temptations in using it. There is the guilt in abusing it. There is the sorrow in losing it. How uncertain riches are. This man's loss reminds us of how uncertain riches are. And secondly, this man's loss reminds us that we cannot take our stuff with us. This man in life found out what is truly true in death. That you come into this world with nothing, and you leave this world with nothing. Sometimes fraud, recession, war will rob you of your possessions, will leave you exposed and desolate. But what's true in life is absolutely true in death. And there's a picture here, a sad picture, if you go to verse 17, of this man who sits and eats in darkness with much sorrow, sickness, and anger. Many commentators believe, you see, he lost everything. Basically now he's got no money for oil for his lamps. He's sitting in the darkness, eating what few morsels of bread he might have. And they would say that that's a picture and a precursor to death itself. He's sitting in the darkness, as we all do. We all abide under the shadow of the death. And we need to be mindful of this, that if life doesn't take stuff from us, death will, without pity, without negotiation. And therefore, we need to live for that which counts. We must live for those things that money cannot buy and death cannot steal. We've got to live for something that provides an advantage that transcends death. And my friend, that's the very Son of God himself, who said, I am the resurrection and the life. Though a man die, yet shall he live. That's why Jesus said in that passage I just quoted from, don't lay up treasure on the earth, lay up treasure in heaven. Live for eternal things. Put your eggs in the basket of the gospel. Live for kingdom priorities. Because death is coming. The hearse is going to park outside all of our homes. You know, I like the undertaker who finished his letter to everybody he wrote to, eventually yours. That's the way it is. And when you understand that, then you understand how temporary life is and how fleeting the things of this world are. And there's no security, no satisfaction, no serenity, no sufficiency in money. Solomon explodes all those myths. And then he explores some truths. Despite all that the preacher has said by way of warning about money, Solomon proceeds to balance out his comments by noting that material wealth is also something to be enjoyed, as long as one understands it as a gift from God. Doesn't see it as an idol, doesn't worship it, doesn't let it have the authority and the power in one's life that God ought to have. And so Solomon balances this whole thing out. He tells us here in verse 18, it is good and fitting for one to eat and drink and to enjoy the good of all his labor. He's been pretty pessimistic, hasn't he, so far about material things, this temporary life. But as in other places in this book prior to this moment, Solomon is coming up for air. He's given us a respite from thinking about the brutality and the brevity and the banality of life. and how life is fleeting and everything that's part of it can be frustrating and vacuous. But he says, look, here's a good thing to do. Here's a fitting thing to do. That's the word there, fitting, that you'll find in chapter 3 and verse 11 when we read, God makes all things beautiful in his time. Here's a beautiful thing to do. Enjoy what God has given you as a gift from God. There's nothing wrong, says Solomon, with enjoying good things and good times within God's providence. And so, as he turns the tables a little here, and he heads off in a different direction in terms of his thinking, he advocates a number of things with regards to money that are much more positive, certainly much more helpful. I've got 3 things I'm going to work through very quickly here. Solomon, first of all, in verses 18 through 20 of chapter 5, encourages a greater appreciation. If you're taking notes, Solomon encourages a greater appreciation. Here's what I've seen. It is good and fitting for one to eat and drink and to enjoy the good of all his labor in which he toils under the sun all the days of his life which God gives, for it is his heritage. Look at verse 20. For he will not dwell unduly on the days of his life. That's the man who God keeps busy with the joys of his heart. That's the man who finds a reason to be joyful. And God gives him many reasons to be joyful. So what we've got in this section really is the heart of this passage. This is the midpoint of the chiasm in the structure of the passage. This is the point being made. But you know what? While money disappoints and must never take the place of God, must never become an idol in our lives. Yet money and material things, the good things of this world, are often an expression of God's goodness to us, and as such we should embrace them and enjoy them without guilt. While Solomon is not blind to the brutality, brevity, banality of life, in these verses he refuses to despair, and he tells us not to despair either. He acknowledges there are many things about life that's saddening and maddening, but you and I can enjoy God's dependable daily gifts, and we should. I like the way the New Living Translation puts those verses. Listen. Even so, I've noticed one thing at least that is good. Okay? It's set against the backdrop of all the frustrating stuff he's been talking about. But you know, the sun's shining through the clouds right now. Even so, I've noticed one thing that is good. It's good for people to eat well, drink a good glass of wine, and enjoy their work, whatever they do under the sun, for however long God lets them live. And it is a good thing to receive wealth from God and the good health to enjoy it. To enjoy your work and accept your lot in life is indeed a gift from God. People who do this rarely look with sorrow on their past, for God has given them reasons for joy. That's Solomon's point. Up until this point in the text, he's presented those anxious and sad faces, blighted by money miseries. And that raises the question, is there no joy to be found in material things? Solomon says, yes, there is. When that joy is sourced in God, who is the source of those good things, those life-enhancing experiences. Solomon's kind of going where Paul goes in 1 Timothy 6:17. God gives us all things to enjoy. In James chapter 1, verse 17, every good and every perfect gift comes from above. Now, let's just pause for a moment and think this through. Solomon encourages a greater appreciation. Okay, I want you to appreciate what's bad about money. I want you to think through the myths. But I also want you to think through and appreciate that if you enjoy good from the hand of God, then embrace it. Don't feel guilty. Embrace it as an expression of his love and good providence, which would say 2 things to us, I think. Number 1, we must enjoy the good with the bad. Okay, we must enjoy the good with the bad. I like the way verse 20 puts it. No man will dwell unduly on the days of his life, because God will keep him busy with reasons to be joyful. There's many things that could occupy us that would make us feel miserable today. The injustices of life, premature deaths in families, all sorts of things where we see the brutality, the brevity, the banality of life, the chasing of the wind. But Solomon says, hey, if you're going to focus there, also focus here. Make sure you spend some time seeing God's goodness at work in this bombed out planet of ours, where you have the crater marks of Adam's sin and disobedience and rebellion and the curse and the judgment that followed it. And Solomon is saying, of course, there are painful and perplexing things to think about, but don't think about those at the expense of the things that are under your nose, the things that are at your hand. There are many respites of joy, and you and I need to take them. Listen to Daniel Estes. The tension that humans face in this life that is so short, to be sure, is that it is a divine gift to be enjoyed at the same time. It is therefore both good and appropriate to accept it joyfully, even with its limitations. Okay, Solomon's very realistic about life. He bursts a whole lot of our bubbles. But at the same time, he says this: when you find joy and you recognize God's hand and you see his provision and his providence, take full advantage of that happiness when it presents itself to you. Now, Solomon's not advocating what we might call, godless Epicureanism, which is, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die. The rich fool, right? In Luke 12, verse 19. No, this is a godly happiness. This is a joy and a happiness that recognizes God's hand at work. And it puts the pause button on when it comes to the complexities and perplexities of life, and it enjoys the love of one's spouse, the admiration of one's child, a good dinner, a walk on the beach, a time to rest and sleep under the shade of a tree on a beautiful summer's day. You know what? The problems can wait. The perplexities can go unanswered. They must. We must take those moments where we can enjoy God's good hand. That's the point. So, take the good with the bad and enjoy the good amidst the stuff of life. As we enjoy moments of great blessing, make sure in the midst of that, whether we're eating or drinking, that we're tasting and seeing that the Lord is good.
Your money or your life. That's the title of today's message here on Know the Truth. It's one portion of a study in Ecclesiastes from Philip DeCourcy. And remember that if you ever miss a message, you can hear every broadcast online at ktt.org. Today's study is part of a series titled The Quest for the Best. At Know the Truth, we're passionate about proclaiming God's Word with boldness, clarity, and conviction, and we're not alone. There are friends like you who come alongside us to bring Philip's teaching to the radio and the Internet. One of the best ways you can make an impact is by signing up to become a Truth Ambassador. Your donation every month adds a greater level of stability to the ministry of Know the Truth. And whether you sign up to become a Truth Ambassador or give a one-time donation, we'll say thanks for your support by sending you a timely resource on the book of Ecclesiastes titled Living Life Backward. If you want to dig deeper into this book of wisdom, this is the book for you. And if you sign up as a Truth Ambassador, you'll also receive a special welcome package, exclusive content from Pastor Philip each month, and a custom stainless steel Know the Truth travel mug. We'll put your resources in the mail when you make a donation by phone at 888-644-8811 or online at ktt.org. And of course, you can also write to us at Know the Truth, Post Office Box 30250, Anaheim Hills, California, 92809. I'm Wayne Shepherd signing off for today, but come back tomorrow for the conclusion to Philip's message, Your Money or Your Life. That's Wednesday on Know the Truth. Today's program was produced and sponsored by Know the Truth Incorporated. Jesus said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free."